houses, about 20,000 of them, and nothing else but houses. And if there are no space about houses, they never thought in shops, cafes, chip shops, they didn't think about anything except building houses.
The scheme's about 25, coming up for 26 years old. It was built as a post-war housing project. It was totally to get housing requirements for derelict property from various areas, east end of Glasgow and centre of Glasgow. Families moved in very enthusiastically, as far as we can gather, my own parents included. The big attraction being that it was in the country, and also it had hot and cold running water and inside baths and various assets like that.
Well, I came for a room and kitchen in Brighton 17 years ago at Easterhouse. I was the oldest 8. And I went into, it was 3 rooms, a living room, toilet, kitchenette, bathroom. It was enormous to me. And it was just like walking into a big castle. That's what the first words we said.
But what you didn't have was basic necessities, like in the old areas, I said, you had the corner shop. You had no shops out here. You didn't even have any pubs, you had nothing. Absolutely nothing. Everything you wanted had to be hauled from the centre of Glasgow, which is miles away. And it took them over 15 to 16 years to give us a shopping centre, to give us basics, like a community centre, for a start. You know, small, even schools. They built very small schools. They wouldn't hold a community of, what, 20-odd thousand people. It was, and some of the kids had to travel back to Glasgow every day, twice a day, to and from Glasgow. It was the only way they could get their education.
I don't think it was done deliberately. I don't think anybody deliberately just threw people into houses, but that's the way that it turned out, that folk were just shuttled in. I feel really bitter about it. There wasn't any great deal of thought or planning. Obviously, it's blatant reality that no planning or future thought about the social requirements for people and children and kids growing up.
We were the guinea pigs. The people that were put into Easterhouse, we were only guinea pigs. And the powers that be made these mistakes. And then when they built all the different new towns like Erskine, Cumbernauld, Glenrothes, they built these basic amenities and they admitted it. Years and years on, they admitted it, that they had let the folk of Easterhouse down, and down very, very badly.
When I was younger, I never thought about the place that I stayed. I just stayed there. It didn't matter. But as I got older and reached the sort of teenage stage, Easterhouse was a name that was receiving a lot of bad press, bad publicity, things like that. And I was utterly and completely ashamed of living in such a place. And I despised my parents for making me being brought up like this. I always wondered why they didn't have posh houses like other people. When people asked me where I came from, I lied. I said Bailliston, which is a sort of posher adjoining estate. I also used it job interviews. I always felt that every time I said the word Easterhouse, that I was guaranteed not to get a job. We're now in Lochdocket Road. This is the Rogerfield area. Security guards have responsibility for looking after it. As you can see, there's mesh wires up between buildings to stop anybody getting in. Although what the hang anybody would want to steal, I don't know, because they're all gutted on the inside and they're merely shells anyway.
outsider that's moved from the Highlands down to Easterhouse. And I wouldn't for the world move out of Easterhouse because the people, they say the heart's not dead. Well, maybe it is, but the heart's still there as far as people are concerned. It doesn't matter if they've not got any money. All their wealth is in their mind, is in their goodness. Because there's a million good things in Easterhouse that people don't hear about. That's done every single day.
Well, I've lived in Easterhouse for 22 years. Sometimes I find it very depressing. You know, very depressing for the people, because I believe in the people in Easterhouse, and I think we deserve a lot better than what we get. And I think it's very disheartening bringing up a child in Easterhouse.
My mother, she raised 7 kids in Easterhouse, and that's credibility to me. That isn't easy. That's a real struggle. We were always clean. We were always fed. We always lived in a clean house. She survived on nothing. She's a very capable lady, and she's really, really strong, and she's really, really powerful. She would fight tooth and nail for her family. And she would face Goliath, she would face absolutely anybody in battle for her family, but only at her level. Where the stopping point comes for her is authority. Probably because of her, my attitude is totally different. It's not enough for me to know local politics. I'm not politically aligned to any particular party. I don't think. I didn't know what the word socialism meant, you know, till I was late teenager. But I want to know and I want to learn. I want to know about these people that are controlling my life. I want to take that control off them, and I want to have it. And I want my children to have it. But the one thing that I can teach them that I think my parents didn't teach me was the history in my area and why I'm here. But I'm a member of the working class, my children are working class, and they've got to learn, through learning about their area, the structure of the area, their history of their area, why it was built, and learning more about, you know, where the buck actually stops. When you learn about where the buck actually stops, you can start changing it. And I've got to bring my children up to want to change the people that are in control of their lives. Health centre in Easterhouse Road, which is just on our left down here, is now being used for child health care. It's a clinic where mums with newborn babies or children who require JAGs or postnatal care and various things like that takes place in this building down here. It's quite ironic, really, because, you know, not 50 yards away from it there's a very plush social club, which is the Labour Club, and it bears no comparison whatsoever to the facilities that the children and the parents have to cope with. I'm very angry, not even about what's happened to the scheme. What hasn't happened to the scheme is more the point. Nothing has happened to the scheme except it's gone vastly downhill. And people would direct that to the people and put responsibility on their shoulders for not upkeeping property and not seeing to their gardens, etc., etc. And the list is endless of the responsibilities that's put on the tenant. But when people live in second-class housing, in second-class conditions, and in a oppressed state with lack of facilities, then I think it's quite true that the people are going to direct their energies into destruction of some sort because they've nowhere else, well, youths anyway, you know, if not more people. And people turn their anger on each other because they've never divulged the knowledge of where they should turn that anger and how that anger should be turned into a power to change the things that are lacking in their area and lacking in their community. And that's not the fault of the people, that's the fault of the people who have the knowledge, who aren't willing to divulge that knowledge and to put the power in the hands of the people who have to live in these diabolical second-class conditions.
afternoon, Voice Office. It's a community newspaper in the fullest sense of the word. We cover the general area of Greater Easterhouse, but we've, in the last few months, been pushing out a bit further into other areas of the East End of Glasgow.
Pretty good. It's good compared to...
It's a reasonably good quality community newspaper, and there's no great mystery to producing it. There's no kind of professional ways of doing things that are ordinary people can't do. We try to encourage people to come in and see how the paper's put together, to see really how easy it can be at times, and to help, if they're interested enough, to build up any kind of confidence they might need to actually write something themselves, come forward, contribute, become involved, not just in the Voice, but on other issues.
When did you go on strike?
We went on strike the 25th of July.
How long has you been strike for?
9 weeks.
The Voice, if you like, is hopefully an effective method letting the politicians know what the people in Easterhouse think, whereas the Daily Record and the establishment papers, if you like, are the effective methods that the politicians use to tell us how things are going to be. We can use the Voice to tell them how we want it. Hopefully we highlight the problems that people are having, that they really are powerless to change unless somebody gives them publicity on it, or there's some public attention drawn to it. The biggest one, like most places, is unemployment. The general level of poverty right through the whole scheme.
I left school when I was 16. I had umpteen jobs until I was 17. My dad says to me when I left school, you'll end up pushing a brush. Granted, I ended up pushing a brush. That was a job. I was getting paid, and that done me. After that, I've been married 6 years, and I've not had a job. I've got 2 kids. I've not had a job. I've been unemployed since, and I can't get a job anywhere. It doesn't matter where I try. I can't get nothing.
God gives a chance. Just because we've no O-levels, no A-levels or nothing, we can't do nothing. Gives a chance to prove ourselves, and then we'll do it.
I want those opportunities for everybody, jobs that you can talk to the youths in the area about giving them a snooker table and a dartboard, and that's just making unemployment bearable. That isn't changing anything. I want somewhere where some way of them being able to upkeep their own environment and their own society and earn money in doing that. Because it's their place. We need jobs. We can patronise them all we want, and we can give them youth centres till we're blue in the face. They need to build these youth centres for themselves. They need to build their own schools.
I think just now, with the present attacks by this government on young people, and especially young people who stay in places like Easterhouse, I think that the whole strategy that this government's using in terms of the op schemes, now the YTS scheme, it's going to be pretty obvious that if any young people, or the vast majority of young people in Easterhouse, are going to have any sort of employment under one of these schemes. And it's pretty obvious for the carousel factory strike that these schemes have got absolutely no accountability.
Well, you're working a 40-hour week for £37 your take-home pay. You're under 18, it's £32, and the conditions are deplorable. This wee lassie's getting the tap of their fingers cut off because he doesn't want to get a guard put on any of the machines. And the place is just manky. It's the only way you can describe it. The MSC pulled all the yacht scheme workers out of there because of the number of accidents.
We went to strike on the 25th. Bum, 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 bum. We needed safety to help us live. We said no longer would we work in that dive. And 2 days later got our P45. Bum, 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 bum.
My personal feelings are, every time I see them, I think they're still fighting, they're still there. I feel angry. the fact that it is dragging on, and the fact that the impotence, if you like, of the trade union movement to finish the strike. And they are impotent. They won't finish it. They won't win it for the young people.
The Labour Party and the Labour movement generally has let down the working class in this country, not just here, but all over the country. I mean, the case of the carousel workers, the youngsters down at Shettleston just now, is a classic case in point. The kids will eventually be beat. It's great to see them fighting, but they'll be beat because there's no great support for the mass of the trade union movement, who have always been telling them and their parents that unity is strength, the union's behind you's going to do it. The unions aren't there to do it anymore. They're away.
I think a lot of people in the Labour Party here in Easterhouse are the salt of the earth, and the Communist Party here in Easterhouse are the salt of the earth. They're working every day, they're struggling every day and trying to help people at a very basic level. I think it's at the national level that the problem lies, with the leadership of the Labour Party and the leadership of the Labour movement, in fact.
The people are virtually powerless. People en masse are a power, but they're only a power if they have the knowledge to move forward and if they're released with the channels to move forward. But as long as they are intimidated by authorities, intimidated by buildings, intimidated by people who use terribly long, educated, articulate words, then the fear is in them not to move forward. They've got to be treated as people, and the people must demand to be treated as people and go out and find out and ask questions. Don't accept what's happening to you. There's obviously a whole lot lacking in the people's lives in Easterhouse and areas like Easterhouse. But it's got to be up to the people who are suffering the problems, who are living in these day-to-day conditions, to make that change. It's their change. They are the people who must make it.
I'm a great believer in community development, and I think it's starting to happen slowly, but there's still a long way to go. And I think it's new ideas, new attitudes, new avenues that people have got to explore all the time and forget about a lot of the things that happened in the past.
The people are great people, and they're very, very capable people. They're intelligent people. They're obviously intelligent people. When someone can live in a place like Easterhouse and survive and still be living and breathing and still have a smile for their neighbour as they pass by their door, that takes struggle, that takes strength, that takes intelligence to be able to cope, and the pittance that most of them have to live on. That's very, very, very strong people.
The people of Easterhouse want the same for their kids as the people who sit on their backsides in the city chambers. Am I right?
Aye, you're right.
Of course you're right. They get hundreds of pounds for sitting doing nothing. They're supposed to be looking after us and our kids, and they're not doing it. It's as simple as that.
That's what better for your kids.
That's it's the truth. They're paid to represent us, and they don't do it. Our kids are walking the streets, kicking tin cans, while theirs I've got great places to play. We're not asking a lot. We just want somewhere for the kids, don't we? Somewhere for the boys, so they don't have to glue sniff, they don't have to drink cheap wine in corners. Just what they want for their own kids, we want for ours. It's as simple as that.
The physical reaction that happened in England, Liverpool, parts of London, Bristol, etc., never happened here. People expected riots, I suppose, in Scotland. Certainly in Glasgow it has that type of image, very similar in some parts to Liverpool. And we had a gang of police up for Liverpool, for Northern Ireland, Belfast, etc., trying to figure out why there was no riots in Glasgow and no riots in Easterhouse. And they sat, well, they toured the area, spoke to quite a few people and probably got a number of reasons. Eventually sat here, and one in particular kept coming back to the fact that there was no blacks in the area, but didn't we think the fact that there was no riots, you know, the fact that there was no blacks in the area, did that not contribute to the fact that there was no riots? The reason there was no riots in the area is because there is no private property up here. They could riot, literally, from one end of Easterhouse to another every day of the week, and it wouldn't be called a riot. Any other disturbance isn't even going to be noticed in Easterhouse. There is nowhere for people to attack in Easterhouse, except each other.
In a later programme, Whose Town Is It Anyway examines the work of the Easterhouse Festival Society, a local response to the problems of Easterhouse.
And see endless things that need to be done. I'm sure equally we can think of people who are capable of doing them. The question is, how do you bring those two together?
In Birmingham and Glasgow, the series explores how council tenants are organising to get a better deal.
This association has really proved that they can get something done.
Because it's the old saying, united we stand, divided we fall. And we've proved it.
In Brent, we look at the changing nature of politics within the black community.
The tendency has been in the past to give money in the hope you can buy off problems. But history shows that that doesn't happen.
Next week, Whose Town Is It Anyway goes to Sheffield.
It's only a couple of years since we had Toxteth. That can happen anywhere, and it will. It's got to happen, but people can't keep that anger pent up. It's got to come out.
If you would like to know more about the issues raised in this series, there is an illustrated booklet. Send £1.25 to Channel 4 Television, Whose Town, P.O. Box 4000, London W3 6XJ, or Glasgow G12 9JN, or Belfast BT2 7FE.
Powinno ją naprawiać. Prawo jest pomysłem.
Yeah, I don't think that's a great thing to be doing.
I wouldn't condemn not one member of the clergy that would carry a licensed gun and have himself trained to use it. And nobody wishes to be a killer, but no one wishes to be killed.
Reinhold Nero, who used to teach theology and ethics in this seminary, used to say it may be possible for a Christian to carry a gun, but the Christian must carry that gun with a heavy heart.
Hello, Jesus, Jesus, children, Jesus loves you, Jesus, children, hello, children, Jesus loves you of America.
Brooklyn, across the famous bridge from glittering Manhattan, has some of the most run-down areas of the entire city of New York. It is also a borough of churches. Since Dutch settlers arrived here in 1636, each wave of immigrants has set up its own community, often round its own church. The Lutherans are here and the Methodists, the Catholics and the Baptists, the Episcopalians, the Presbyterians, and that's just the churches with familiar names. There are also numerous storefront churches constructed from former shops. They each have their local congregations, served by ministers who often have other jobs during the day. Brooklyn is second to Harlem in its concentration of black residents. They too have their churches, Pentecostal and evangelical. And there's a huge Jewish community. All told, there's reckoned to be in Brooklyn some 600 churches and 300 synagogues. People who serve those churches are increasingly targets of violence.
synagogue over in Park Slope had its entire organ pipe, stops and what have you, stolen during the middle of a week when they were not having services. There was one church which had altar furniture which was carved from the Mount of Olives, taken from its sanctuary, and you have altar cloths being taken by someone saying they're from a carpet cleaning firm.
We had, just a few months back, you had a minister killed, which is about 6 blocks away. He was killed on a Wednesday afternoon in his church. He came into his church and somebody was waiting for him and he was killed there. They found him at about 6 o'clock. Reverend Irvin Wilson was his name. You had a rabbi who was going to prayer early in the morning. He was up for prayer, and he was shot in his car and killed right out here in Williamsburg.
One of the sisters was mugged and threatened at our back gate when she was coming out in the car. And there was another sister in the car, and they had just backed out the car, and this one sister got out of the car and was closing the gate when a man came up to her with a knife and put it at her throat and threatened her and said he wanted some money.
We entered the church and found that somebody was on the second floor. We divided ourselves and eventually caught the intruder. We asked him to remain quiet until the police should arrive. He refused, and we assisted him to be quiet.
Still confined to his hospital bed 8 weeks after being shot in the legs is Father Charles Plock of the Vincentian Fathers. He grew up and went to school in Brooklyn.
Well, it occurred on Easter Sunday. I was coming home from visiting a friend in Philadelphia who was going into a rehab center for alcohol abuse. And as I got about a half a block from the church, 2 men from behind came up and one shot off a gun and tried to rob me. And I got into a struggle with the one guy, and when they couldn't get anything, the guy shouted to the other fella, "Shoot him." And I was lucky in a sense because he was actually, the guy who shot me was aimed very high and then deliberately pointed the gun low and shot me. I remember laying on the sidewalk and watching the blood running out and saying to myself, there's a lot of blood that's going out, and being concerned that so much blood was being lost. It went through the thigh and then into the lower leg here, went through both legs.
That was a nasty event.
Oh, yeah. It destroyed the artery and the vein and the nerve, and I have been here for 8 weeks as the consequence, so it has been quite an event.
Did you, even at such a point of extreme violence, feel any sort of forgiveness of your attackers? You're meant to love the sinner, aren't you?
At that point, I was more, I was hardly thinking of forgiveness. I remember when the shot went off and having felt it and falling, being rather angry that, that he had done it and realizing what had happened, and then beginning to feel the pain, actually being rather angry that this whole event had happened. Forgiveness wasn't quite in my mind at that point.
This wave of crime, with its total disregard for the nature of the targets, can be explained by one thing: drugs, and more particularly the newest drug, crack, which is now used on a scale that reaches epidemic proportions. 8 out of 10 families in Brooklyn have a member who is a drug user, and the drug addict, desperate for money and often actually under the influence of drugs, is unpredictable and dangerous.
When I came over here, some 34 years ago, you had beautiful homes. You had doctors, lawyers, other persons living there. We didn't have any problem with drugs and things like that. We could stay out in the yard. You could sleep in the yard if you wanted to. But now you can't do that. It's been drastic change, and all of it is pertaining to drugs. I'll give you an example. When I came over here, you had foot patrol. You had policemen out walking, waving. Things were nice. It's still, you know, still hope, but it's bad now.
What's going on? A noise woke me up. It was my older brother, Ricky. He was going through my pocket looking for money. He grabbed my throat and threw me against the wall. He was high on crack. He was my older brother, man, and he was gonna kill me for some crack. I'm never gonna be like him, because nobody make me do drugs.
A drug addict has no respect for a minister or anybody else. It used to be that if a person who drank alcohol, once he saw a good Christian, or a member of the clergy, or deaconess or some missionary, he would straighten up himself. He would, as drunk as he might be, or high as he might be, he would try to straighten up a little. But drugs has a different thing. A drug addict has no respect for anybody. No respect, no regard for anybody. So he'll rob the church. He'll destroy the clergy or the priest or the rabbi in order to get something from him, to go buy the drugs.
In the past, they will take what you had and forget about you. Today, they will kill you, take what you have, and kill anybody else without any point of remorse. It is very foolish for an individual to sit as a sitting target or announce, well, we do not have any weapons here. You can walk in and take our lives, take the lives of the people that we have dedicated ourselves to serve. All the reconciliation and the healing that we try to do in the community would be of no vain. It wouldn't make sense to even be a preacher.
For years, the church's commitment to the poor and downtrodden has appealed to idealistic young people going into the ministry. Their faith and their convictions lead them deliberately to choose inner city parishes where the desperation and the need is greatest. But this calling brings them to neighborhoods run by crack dealers, where crack houses are known and tolerated, where crime on the streets in daylight is a way of life. Increasingly, the strain proves too great. Increasingly, young clergy are leaving places like this after a year or two. Union Theological Seminary is where many of them train.
I would say we are seeking in this seminary to train people who will undertake a ministry of presence, at least, who at least be there. As recent articles in the newspaper have indicated, just to remain as a professional in these decaying inner city areas sometimes requires more sacrifice than can be sustained over a long time. After 2 or 3 years of this, a minister, a doctor, a social worker may find him or herself exhausted, poorly paid, and at the extreme threatened with such violence as might lead to their murder. There's nothing romantic about being in the inner city, in short, and because our society has managed to make it a dumping ground for a lot of the problems we don't otherwise know how to solve, anybody that considers that situation their mission field has got to have an enormous amount of courage.
Is it your religious calling that has led you into this dangerous community, doing work that gets you attacked?
I would say partly yes. You know, St. Vincent de Paul, one of his works, one of the kind of like the inspirations that he gives to us as his followers is that he says he wants us to be among people who the rest of society kind of casts aside and forgets about and doesn't consider to be important. And so often when I look at just the people in Bedford-Stuyvesant and the conditions that exist there, I say to myself, I think that's exactly where St. Vincent would want us to be.
Father Charlie, as he's known, is no stranger to violence. Before coming here to Brooklyn, he worked for 10 years in Latin America, among Panamanian workers and the Sandinistas. He believes in living with the poorest and most deprived at the front line of their struggle. He sees Brooklyn as just such a front line.
And being in that situation involves certain risks. You know, the violence is certainly one of the big things. You know, like most of the people with whom we work, they've all experienced on a very personal level, either for themselves or their families, where they've been mugged, robbed. Some of the women have been raped. You know, it's very, very prevalent.
The church has a real dilemma in dealing with violence on such a level that its very existence is threatened. Isn't confronting violence with violence against the Christian ethic? And aren't we taught to love our enemies?
Early Christians were pacifists. By the time of Constantine, there were a lot of Christians in the armies of Rome, and pacifism fell by the side as a majority view. It was taken up mostly by the monastics, but in its place came St. Augustine's view of the just war, and that dominated most of the Middle Ages and right on down to our own time, in which, you know, there are some good wars, some bad wars from the standpoint of certain values of human beings.
How far would you yourself go, or allow any of your church members to go, in defending this church?
Well, we wouldn't appreciate any person coming in and taking anything from us. We would fight back. You wouldn't love a bad guy who has a gun trying to destroy you. But you would love a person who would have enough knowledge to protect himself with a proper license to carry a gun. I would give him a lot of credit for that.
But the church must love sinners too.
Sure. And you also see if you can love him enough to help him before he destroys you. And I had rather, at any time, have somebody else's funeral than have mine. And you had too. There's nobody in this sanctuary would want to be destroyed in order to save somebody else. There is not even the Pope didn't like it when he was shot. He was hurt. Ronald Reagan was shot. Didn't appreciate that.
The Mission and Human Service Centre, where Father Plock is based, is also home to 6 nuns, the Daughters of Charity. Since one of their number was mugged in the doorway here, the sisters have decided deliberately to carry muggers' money, enough to give any mugger who attacks them, and an insurance of a sort against being injured.
Usually the person that would come up to us is a drug addict who's extremely desperate. And usually they're under the influence of drugs when they accost us. So I never would trust what they would do. So it's not a good idea to walk around with nothing on us, on our person, because they get very angry and they get desperate, and that's when they get violent.
Whatever the churches have done, Christ's own example was consistently one of peaceful confrontation with evil, even up to his own violent death. And the New Testament speaks of turning the other cheek, deliberately not answering violence with violence.
For the most part, we practice a kind of alleged just war theory, both in our personal relationships to violence and in our large social, because we think violence does have a just use. But the pacifist ethic is a very hard one to put consistently into practice. Almost every pacifist will eventually have a troubled conscience. as he or she knows that violence sometimes is at least a provisional answer to violence?
Nah, I don't. Like, I couldn't imagine myself carrying arms. I just think it would be a contradiction of what I actually stand for and what I am trying to do there. And I think by carrying arms, I become then another piece of an ongoing problem. You know, we have, I think, too many people carrying arms. And now, for myself to begin carrying arms, great. So now we got some more people who are armed, you know, and who's going to shoot who?
Turn the other cheek. It doesn't mean that turning the other cheek doesn't mean that I'm to sit here and let you physically beat me to death. That's not turning the other cheek. That's not what that means. It means that I'm to be kind, I'm to be loving to you, regardless of your action of spirit. Your spirit may not be the same as mine, but I'm to be kind to you regardless of that. But when you talk about physical things, turning the other cheek didn't mean that.
Is one going to meet a violent situation by direct violence? And what does that gain? You know, history shows that an act of violence then to be met by another act of violence, and it just keeps going on. Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, they didn't surrender meekly, but they met the violence in a whole different approach that I think we as Christians tend to push aside and forget about and say is not valid. And I think their method was quite effective. You know what I mean? Much of the gains in the whole civil rights movement was due to what Martin Luther King was able to do in his own lifetime. India became a free nation because of what Mahatma Gandhi was able to do in his time. And Enrique Esquivel in Argentina has been able to do the same thing with the mothers of those who have disappeared because of his approach and his nonviolent approach to injustice. But it's not whereby they surrender, it's whereby they demand that they be recognized as people with dignity, with worth, with gifts, with talents, and they shout that out over and over and over again and demand that it be respected.
The first thing that we must do here tonight is to decide that we aren't going to become panicky. That's right. That we're going to be calm, and that we are going to continue to stand up for what we know is right, and that Alabama will have to face the fact that we are determined to be free.
The civil rights movement wasn't a spineless response to the violence it met. It called for courage, restraint, and implacable resolve. Its leader, Martin Luther King, was shot dead, but the movement he led was victorious. Gandhi, too, had been shot, even as his campaign triumphed. Violence could end their lives, but not the purpose of those lives. Yet in the patchwork of New York's inner-city conflict, there is no such unifying cause or glorious campaign. The threats, the chaos, the violence come from all directions. Each is left to do what he can and feels he must. If you knew that members of your congregation were carrying guns, would you be upset?
Not if they were legally carrying them.
You'd let them into this
church?
church?
Oh, certainly. I welcome you. If you have a registered gun, or if you're a policeman, you have a registered gun from the state of New York, you're trained, I welcome you to the congregation.
You let them sit in the pew with a gun?
I don't care where you sit.
You don't have to leave your gun at the door?
No. I'm not going to leave no gun at the door. Now, you think about that now. If you leave your gun at the door, you're a good Christian. You have a legal gun. You leave it at the door. The bad guy steps into the hall, as it will happen, and get the gun. What you going to do? That's what's to run through your mind. This fella the gun is not going to take anything away from that fellow worshiping. It's not going to bother me. What would bother me if someone would come into the church and maybe a bad guy would grab one of the ushers, for instance, hold them hostage, threaten to kill them some type of way for something they wanted out of here. And we have no help, nothing. No policeman around. By the time you would go and call one, you would be 45 minutes, maybe a half hour, 45 minutes to get here. You call 911, let's pray and hope somebody might be in the area and they can show up right away.
How can you pray devoutly when you've got a gun in your pocket?
I don't know how I could, and I could only relate to that by saying that when I was in the army in Germany, I went to church regularly. When I was in Vietnam for an 8-month tour, I never went to church. And here I am, director of the Brooklyn Council of Churches, but I did not feel comfortable having an M14 rifle right next to me as an extension of my right arm, and you had to have that with you wherever you were. So I just never attended worship when I was in a combat situation. I think you would have maybe you would pray very sincerely. Maybe that would heighten your sense of prayer, but I couldn't cope with that myself.
Can I take up the dilemma, though, for the individual minister? He has been trained in the Christian ethic to behave in a particular way. What sort of dilemma does he face when he's thinking of going out and buying a gun himself?
Well, he's facing the conflict between his upbringing to be very critical of violence and his resistance to the notion that anything religious can be achieved with a gun. That on one side, and on the other side, the threat to some very religious things, beginning with his or her own life, that of parishioners, and that of the church itself. I mean, there's a church building's robbery is a threat to the integrity of the church, and the protection of life and property is, after all, one of the basic reasons usually alleged for violence itself. In a society where that violence can sometimes come from any direction, the notion of being instantly equipped to resist it certainly has its appeal.
All of this only arises because America is the land of the gun. It is alone in the world in linking the freedom of its people guaranteed by its constitution with their right as individual citizens to carry guns. In no other democracy is this idea sustained. It is uniquely American, born of its frontier history and also, many now believe, of a misinterpretation handed down for generations of what that constitution actually means. In 1987, over 8,000 such free citizens were murdered with handguns. Richard Aborn was for 6 years homicide prosecutor for the New York District Attorney's Office.
America has a violent society, it always has, and it's something that we Americans need to address, and need to address very vigorously. People feel if they have a gun, they are more safe. The reality is, they're not. You are 40 times more likely to have a gun used against you that you carry for self-defense than that you are going to use it successfully in self-defense. 40 times more likely it's going to be used against you. So it is by no means the panacea of self-defense that people think it is. And people have got to be extremely careful. There's nothing more dangerous than a false sense of security. And that's what a gun gives you. It's a false sense of security. It makes you bold and sometimes inappropriate in situations where you would otherwise be more prudent. And that's what I worry about.
We talk about the right to own guns with a certain overplus of idealism and political freedom. Remember, the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the Bill of Rights, after talking about freedom of speech and freedom of religion, goes on, Second Amendment, to talk about the right of the people to bear arms and to have a well-regulated militia. That amendment is frequently referred to by the gun lobby as sustaining the right of Americans, everyone, to own a gun. I would side with those legal scholars who say that that amendment did not have anything to do with individual rights to own weapons. What had a great deal to do with the right of the original states to have their own militia, or what we now call a National Guard.
At its extreme, guns are popular entertainment.